story. The SANDF says the deployment of the army into gang-infested areas on the Cape Flats will not go ahead today. Police Minister Bheki Cele announced the deployment during his budget vote speech in Parliament yesterday. In a moment, I'll be joined by General Siphiwe Dlamini, who speaks on behalf of the Department of Defense, to sort of talk about some of the technicalities of the deployment and how it all plays out. We know, of course, that this is a process that is governed strictly by the Constitution, but also by various laws in the country, including the Defense Act, and it's a decision that is never taken lightly. So thank you so much, General Siphiwe Dlamini, for joining me on this conversation. So the decision to deploy these members of the SANDF, as I say in the introduction, is not taken lightly. Tell us about what processes have gone through before this decision is actually implemented.
Thulasizwe, thank you very much for inviting us. Let me just make one correction. I am Siphiwe.
You've been given a general,
you have,
general rank. Yes,
you
absolutely.
Promoted me.
I picked that up and I should have corrected it. My apologies.
Yes. Well, Thulasizwe, the deployment of the military internally takes, there's a process that has to be followed, and which is a legal process in the main. What happens is a request would come from the South African Police Service in this case, having analyzed and come to a conclusion that they would need support from the South African National Defence Force. That process begins by a letter being written to the Minister of Defense by the Minister of Police requesting assistance in this regard. After that, the consideration will be done within the Defense Force to say, here is a letter requesting our assistance in this regard. And the letter would stipulate what type of support would be requested by the South African Police Service. And that would be processed within the internal processes of the Defense Force, following which a recommendation will then be drafted, signed by the minister, and sent to the Commander-in-Chief, the President, who's the only person authorized to deploy the South African National Defense Force. After he's considered that, he would then require certain documents which we call deployment papers. Those deployment papers are the legal prescripts that we have to follow. They detail when will we be deploying, how many members will be deploying, for how long we'll be deploying, and where we'll be deploying,
command and control,
and what we'll be doing there, how we'll be doing our work. And once that has been satisfied, the President accent to that and say, I authorize you to go ahead and assist them.
So in the current situation with the Cape Flats and the violence that has flared up there, I mean, the number of murders we saw in the past weekend in the area of Philippi suggests that there is something of an emergency, and I'm not talking technical, in terms of technical terms, emergency, but basically common sense suggests that there is an emergency. Where are we in those processes at the moment?
The decision by our principals was taken in effect yesterday that there is an urgent need to get the support of the South African National Defence Force. And that process started already, and I'm aware that those papers that we're talking about have been processed. Meanwhile, from our side, because we're already in the loop that such a request has been made and a deployment is imminent, we then begin to mobilize our troops. And that process is done in parallel with the legal process and the documents. Once we've mobilized our troops, we then begin the process of transporting those troops from wherever we're getting them from to the site of the theater. And that's presently what is taking place now.
So how long then are you able to estimate before the hard-pressed people of areas such as Philippi start seeing members of the SANDF patrolling the streets, with the thinking, of course, being that their presence will serve as a deterrent?
Indeed, and I must indicate to the people of the Western Cape, in particular the areas that have been affected, that we take their concerns and their calls very seriously, and we will be moving in the quickest possible times once our processes, particularly the orientation of our troops, because we need to orientate them as to which areas they are going to, what are the areas like, what is the makeup of those areas. So as soon as those processes of orientating them, I'm aware as I was driving here that already our troops have already, some of them have landed in Cape Town. But as to whether the foot on the ground will be between today, tomorrow, I cannot safely say that. But within the next 48 hours, in my view, from where I'm sitting, we should be comfortable enough to have the boots on the ground.
All right, so while we're talking here, Siphiwe, we are showing also on screen the relevant excerpts from the Defence Act that regulate the deployment of the members of the South African National Defence Forces in assistance to the South African police services, and basically they outline the kind of powers that they have in terms of assisting with law enforcement, that, you know, the powers that they are bestowed with. And I think my eyesight is failing me to a certain extent, but they largely fall in line with what powers members of the SAPS have, and it also spells out the kind of command and control, that it's not handed over. The SANDF command and control is not necessarily handed over to the SAPS, but they also don't take over command and control of members of the SAPS, powers of stopping people and effecting arrests and those kind of things. What are the safeguards that ensure that human rights are respected in the carrying out of these actions of the SANDF?
Thulasizwe, you'd know, having worked with us previously, we've been deploying with the South African Police Services from time immemorial, and in particular during the festive season, and the protocols that we have between ourselves and the South African Police Service. In this regard, we are supporting the work that the South African Police Service will be doing. We are there as a support to the SAPS to carry out its duties. All the powers that rest with policing remain with policing. And those that rest with us from a defense point of view in support of those elements of the South African Police Service remain with us. Let me give you an example. If we were to go into area X, we would normally cordon off the area as the defense force and let the police conduct their policing responsibilities. But we will close off that area so that nobody comes in, nobody goes in until that particular job has been completed. So the arresting, going into houses and into whatever kind of place, that would be done by the police with us in the background. Right. In the other instance, we would man roadblocks together. Where we stop a car, a member of the police service must be there, and the search must be done. But we make sure that police are not disturbed in cause of their duties by...
So another question then comes, Siphiwe. I mean, when you go out to peacekeeping missions, it's quite clear the rules there when you can engage. Yes. The various people who are at play there, the conditions under which, if you come under fire, yes, you can return fire. What happens in an instance like this? I mean, the Cape Flats, some of the violence we've seen there is quite extraordinary. What happens, what are the guidelines that guide how you respond when you can respond? Yeah. Yeah. Remembering that even those who are engaged in criminal activity remain citizens of South Africa, it would be an extraordinary situation for you, wouldn't it?
It's a difficult situation, I must say. But I would like to say to you, Thulasizwe, if you were to ask the 13 families that have lost their brothers and sisters, daughters and sons, to respond to that question, they would say the Defence Force must use serious force to deal with that. But we're not in that kind of space. But equally, we are responsible. We have to be responsible enough to make sure that those families that have lost their loved ones and those that are living in fear get solace that the South African National Defence Force is there to support the police and is there to make sure that those killings, which are unnecessarily so, do not take place. We have to work within the force that is used by the Defence Force in support of the police, guided by what the police would be doing. But we can't sit and fold our arms when we come under fire. It is how we manage that which is critical.
So I suppose part of the technicalities that are going on now is about that, defining the exact parameters, the exact circumstances under which the arms of the members of the SANDF could potentially end up being used against persons who are citizens of the Republic, which I again say would be an extraordinary situation.
Remember, the police are actually the people who are conducting and confronting these kinds of situations. We are in the background. Only as and when it becomes necessary for the Defence Force, from the police point of view, to enter into that space.
Are there lessons that you're taking into this situation, Siphiwe, that you learned from when you were asked to support the SAPS in Alexandra Township? I think it was 2015 thereabouts, around the issues of xenophobic violence, but also in 2008. What are some of the lessons you take into this situation?
The lessons we've taken there is that as long as there's proper and clear-cut command and control in relation to the two entities, as to who does what, at which point. And that command and control allows these two entities to operate within their space. You will not have a challenge. It's only when there's encroachment between the two entities then you may find a problem. But we've learned quite a number of lessons. As I said to you earlier, we've been helping and supporting the police during festive season. So we've got, I can safely say, we've got quite an experience in terms of working together with the police.
So just a quick answer from you, and I am under pressure. What is your quick and short answer to when can we expect the full deployment of the SANDF boots on the ground?
I'll be speculating, and I don't like speculating.
Days? Hours?
No.
Siphiwe Dlamini, thank you so much for coming through. You've been absolutely clear, though, about the technicalities that are supposed to go into place and the lines, the demarcation of the lines that does need to happen. Siphiwe Dlamini speaks on behalf of the South African National Defence Force, talking to us about the decision that is in the process now of being implemented to deploy members of the SANDF to support the SAPS in areas of the Western Cape that have been hit by gang violence. Stand by.